So last week we looked at the cleanliness side and excessive hair and deodorant and all of those things for the Romans. But of course, if you're a proper Roman lady, or indeed to a certain extent gentleman, going out for a night on the town, there is more to it than that. You are also going to want to be properly made up, or at least most of them are. As again, there's variations in opinion about this at different times. A lot of people say it is very important. The playwright Plautus writes in one of his plays, "A woman without paint is like food without salt." Which is kind of damning. Salt being quite an important condiment even then. And of course there are those on the other side who say that it's only prostitutes that wear makeup and that true beauty comes from within, comes from virtue and nature. And the early church very much promote that idea that it's sinful and it destroys your true beauty. Possibly that, why would you unless you're trying to attract a man, that sort of thing. And certainly some of what you use probably is destroying your true beauty, if only in the physical sense of eating holes in your face. There is a kind of, obviously we're talking over a long period of time historically and a continent effectively. So there's a lot of variation, but a lot of the time people do want the kind of enhanced natural, something that looks your best self without anybody knowing that you've done it. Ovid writes about this a lot, and he's more kind of positive about makeup than most of the writers of the time. He says, if the face lacks the natural rosy hue that comes from the blood, there are arts to achieve that. Apply your art to reinforce the thin rim of the eyebrows, and let a small mole adorn your milky white cheeks. And there is no shame in highlighting the eyes with fine charcoal or with crocus. That gives you a sort of starting point for the kind of look they're going for. But he does then add that nobody should know that you're doing it. He says, on no account let your lover find you with a lot of aids to beauty boxes around you. The art that adorns you should be unsuspected. Let your servants tell us that you are still asleep. If we arrive before your toilette is finished, why should I know what it is that makes your skin so white? Keep your door shut and don't let me see the work before it's finished. There are a whole host of things we men should know nothing about. Most of these various artifices would give us a nasty turn if you didn't take care not to let us see them. Everything has to be done behind closed doors. Then, of course, when the gentleman comes in, you're looking perfect for him, and that's the way he likes it. And this is the most positive of the writers on the subject. And that little aids to beauty boxes is quite interesting, because that shows us something about how all of these cosmetics are being stored. And they would have a box containing a comb, lots of little pots and spoons and a palette, because of course, remember, they're doing a lot of this themselves. Most of the way down the social scale, up the social scale, you'll be doing your own production of makeup from raw ingredients. So you're going to need a palette. Lots of these little palettes have been found along Hadrian's Wall. They're just little bits of slate or something like that, usually, that will be used to grind up your cosmetics. You'd have little vials of oil. There's a lovely one found at Oplontis that's this little wooden case that's divided into sections, each one of which has a little glass jar in it with a lid. And then also has bone spatulas and little glass plates for mixing together your creams and crushing your powders and so on. Some of them are scallop shell shaped. That's another favoured one. They might be plain or they might be decorated. And sometimes one of the symbols that gets used for this, surprisingly often, are the symbols of Hercules, his club and his cape. And the reason for that is the story of Queen Omphale of Lydia, who apparently knew she was unable to disarm Hercules by the art of combat or anything like that, but she used the arts of beauty to seduce him and then was able to take his weapons from him. So having that on your pot is basically saying, ladies, with correct use of these arts, you can defeat even Hercules. This is important. They might well have a mirror. I was trying to find my mirror earlier today, and it's in a bit of bad nick because I've not been looking after it properly. Basically, their mirrors would not be glass because they didn't know how to silver glass until towards the end of the period, and then they're very expensive. So mostly you're talking either little hand mirror shapes or little rectangles of brass polished, and that's what this is. And I'm going to have to kind of get a reflection of myself in the reflection, so you can see there that's not bad as a mirror. Yeah, And this is one that I have mistreated because I've got fingerprints on it and they've started to eat away at the metal, but nonetheless, that's not bad as a mirror. So they could get a pretty good idea of what they were doing looking in the mirror. And that's, of course, if you don't have a slave to do it for you. A lot of people, you know, a general slave might do it. If you're a bit richer, you have an ornatrix, who is the slave that does all of your look. And if you're richer still, your ornatrix does your hair and is in charge of the makeup regime. And you have cosmetai, who are in charge of your cosmetics at the same time. Roman ladies then have, or are supposed to have, perfectly flawless, pale skin. This, of course, is really not that likely to happen in the heat of the Roman or North African sun, and given the natural complexion of people that come from those places. But you don't want it to look like you ever have to go out into the hot sun. You have slaves to go and do things like that for you. So what you want is to be as pale as possible. And they really are talking about white, not just about natural coloured pale looks. Two poets both talk about the same lady. I don't know if she's a real person or one's taken the idea from the other, but her name is Chione, and that means snowy white, and that's her complexion. She's white as snow. It's a whole fairy tale thing going on there. So if you don't have a naturally porcelain complexion, you've got to fake it. And in the same way as at other times through history, look at Queen Elizabeth I and so on, there are several options for that. But sadly, the best option from the point of view of actually getting it to work on your face is also the most dangerous. Lead carbonate, also known as white lead or ceruse, which is made by introducing lead to vinegar. So you either pour your vinegar over lead shavings, or you hang a piece of lead over vinegar fumes, and after a while, this is a sheet of lead, and after a while it's picking up the light too much to even see, but it's actually white. There's like a white powder on the top surface of that. You see that? And I can hold it for a bit. It's not that poisonous, but let's scrape that off and start again, build that up. And there's a marvellous lady called Sally Pointer who makes replica cosmetics. And this is supposed to be as close as you can get to a fake lead carbonate that has the same effect as proper ceruse would. So I'm just going to pretend this in a mirror. Like I say, it's actually putting a layer of white on it. I feel like I'm going back to my goth days here. And again, depending on how heavily you put that on, you see that? It is a layer of white powder. It goes on quite evenly, it goes on quite, and that's supposed to be as close as you can get to kind of faking. See, given anyone whose skin isn't really pale to start with, that's just going to end up looking a bit weird, but that's the look apparently. But the real thing is going to scar your skin, dry your skin out. That means you put it on thicker next time, right? To hide all of those scars. And eventually you'll get lead poisoning. But to be fair, you're more likely to get lead poisoning faster from your cooking vessels or your pipes or something else. So it's not a big issue, really. But it is the best for going on evenly without any sort of oil base and without any streaking and whatnot. There are other options, chalk-based things, orris root-based things. They found one in London a few years back when they were digging up in Roman London. They found an amazing little pot that is exactly the same shape as some modern face powder pots, except this one's metal. And fortunately, it was sealed up and they were able to open it up and identify exactly the contents inside it. And it is 40% animal fat, probably goat, they think most likely goat fat, 40% starch, from some sort of powdered root or from wheat, and the rest is cassiterite, which is tin oxide, which apparently has a very similar effect to the lead. But it's theorised they don't know the difference between those two things anyway. Not sure that's actually likely, but whether they'd realised that one was much better for you than the other. And the cassiterides was another name for the British Isles because it's where the tin comes from, and actually cassiterite is a form of tin ore that you haven't even processed as far as turning it into tin, so it's relatively cheap and easy to get hold of. So there's a few examples. As you see, it's very matte, it's very flat colouring, and yet sometimes you get references in the poetry and descriptions of the time of faces being shining, Now, this is unlikely to be referring to the women glowing. So what's going on there? Might be just there's an oil base involved and the face is slightly oily. Some people have theorized that there's actually basically a shimmer powder going on, that they use something like crushed up mica. There is one reference to using a glassy paste that is also used in ring stones, but it couldn't be actual glass because, you know, you couldn't grind it fine enough to not cut holes in your face. But mica, you possibly could. So it might actually be that they invented a mica-based shimmer powder. Romans are brilliant, just the same as us, completely bonkers at the same time. You'd want your blusher. Options for blusher. Well, some of them are very cheap, and that's the thing about a lot of these ingredients. While there are really expensive versions you can do, you can also put together a really decent Roman makeup look, if you were back in ancient Rome, with next to no effort, because you could just get the dregs of your red wine. You ever have those little dark red bits at the bottom of cheap red wine? Perfect. On your face. Sadly, I haven't got any of that to demonstrate with, but trust me, it works. Mulberry juice, red ochre, very bright. You'd have to dull that down with something else. Mercuric sulfide, less of a good idea. Anything with those words in is always going to be bad, right? Orchil, which comes from an Indian lichen and is a sort of reddish purple colour. Fucus, which comes from rubbing the right seaweed on your face. Not sure that the smell is going to do you much good. We'll come to perfume in a bit. Going to need it to take off that smell that you've been rubbing your cheeks in seaweed. You'll find a lot of sources that say they have lipstick, but as far as I can tell, there's not actually any direct evidence of wearing lipstick. It's just that they have all the ingredients to make them, and they do make treatment for chapped lips. So there's no reason to think that they couldn't combine those ideas with the colourant and make lipstick. But I can't find any proof that that was actually something they did. Instead, you know, modern stuff always tells you concentrate on the lips or the eyes. They're all about the eyes. And the fashion is for, you know, big, dark eyes. Eyebrows, as we said previously, can vary. You can go for the look with the very thick brows and even a bit of mouse fur if you're lacking yourself, or you can thicken your eyebrows out with soot or with antimony. And thick eyelashes. Now, here's a weird one. You want your eyelashes to look good and luxuriant, because Pliny the Elder writes that eyelashes will fall out, not undeservedly, for excessive sex. You have too much sex, your eyelashes will fall out. Therefore, it is important for every woman to make very clear that it looks like their eyelashes have not in fact fallen out, or everybody will start wondering about them. And he also says that some women have their eyelashes dyed every day, such is their desire to achieve beauty. These are in the same paragraph, but it doesn't seem to have occurred to him that maybe women are dyeing their eyelashes every day so that people like him aren't looking at them like, your eyelashes are shorter than they were last week. Doesn't seem to be a specific mascara as such, but given the nature of the eyeliner they're using, you could just kind of carry it on up your eyelashes a little bit. And your basic principle again is some sort of soot. If you're posh, you're going to go for something like charring rose petals and charring saffron and mixing them together. Further down the social scale, you might use some burned cork, or the simplest thing you can do, of course, is just get lamp black, which is fine soot from candles and things like that. And then you need some sort of liquid, rose water, olive oil, gum arabic, anything you like. And they quite often have little two-sided containers. You know how modern makeup sometimes has a different thing in both ends of the pot? You have a thing with a liquid in one end and the powder in the other, and you just, and I can demonstrate again, I've got my olive oil here. Just get that nice and damp there. I've got my soot, my lamp black. You've got to get the proportion of the two about right, obviously, or you end up with too much powder or too much water. But you get those two together, you get, you know, decent eyeliner, right? And I have worn this on my face, and it starts to crack after a little while, but generally it stayed on all day without any trouble. And you can see you could get good at doing really fine line work with that. It's just black, it's just soot. If it gets in your eyes, it's a bit uncomfortable, but then so is more or less anything, so it's fine. And these little pots, again, are found all over the place, including, curiously, in some of the Roman fort sites, which makes you wonder whether some of them are doing the blacking their eyes out. Certainly if they're of Egyptian extraction, that would be quite normal, because in Romano-Egypt, as in earlier Egypt, both men, women, children would all wear quite heavy dark eyes because it helps protect against the sun. It's the same reason that Jack Sparrow has the black there. It helps keep some of the sun away from your eyes. So it's not impossible that some of the soldiers had the same look going. They did also have eyeshadow. It could be from various things. You could make a sort of orange from saffron. You could make a grey-blue from galena, not very good for you. You can make a bright, beautiful sort of turquoise blue colour from malachite powdered up, or turquoise green colour. I couldn't find mine, unfortunately, to demonstrate that, but it's really bright, and that one is, again, an Egyptian influenced one. The Egyptians said it would keep off the evil spirits, keep off the evil eye, and certainly when you have it all over your eye and you blink, there's this sort of flash of bright green that's really quite startling. So who knows, might keep off the evil eye. It's mildly good against eye complaints, actually, malachite. Although on the other hand, it does kind of flake into little bits which could scratch. So some and some there. The British add their own unique element to makeup at this point. They have a particular style of cosmetic grinder, which is quite beautiful. It's like a curve that way with a little top on it that you can use. So you can use the flat bit like that to grind your paste up. And then, because of the shape, it's also got little pointy corners, which you can then dip in and use. So you can use the same tool for your grinding and for your application. And that seems to probably be a Celtic thing, because Romano-Britain is the only place that it's found. Doesn't spread to the rest of the empire. Another thing you would want to do is to smell good. And you've got as far as smelling not of sweat, hopefully, if you've been using the correct deodorant recipes. But you're also going to want to have some perfume going on. And they were very into it, very liberally applied on their skin, on their hair. They're burning things in the room. Perfume, originally, of course, perfumums by burning. So it's making the place smell nice by burning something. They would also add perfume to wine, because quite a lot of the perfumes are drinkable. So you'd be drinking a very perfumed drink, but that was part of the point. And generally you start off with an olive oil and you steep your flowers and your herbs in it, and then you add some sort of resin or gum. Quite a lot of them were very short-lived, so you would find people continually sort of adding more and more perfume to themselves as the day went on and it evaporated. And some people do get teased for overdoing it. In Marshall's epigrams, Marshall is very cynical, very sarcastic gentleman about more or less everything, and he writes these little snide remarks about pretty much everything. And he says, you laugh at me and my lack of perfume. I prefer to have no odour rather than to reek to high heaven. It is as if Cosmo the perfumer were moving shop and cinnamon was streaming from an upturned bottle. You know, I think even my dog would smell as you were he perfumed. Sorry, would smell as good as you were he perfumed. Yeah, that's Marshall for you. Juvenal says that a woman buys scents and lotions with adultery in mind. And Cicero, who is again very staid in most of his ways, says the right scent for a woman is none at all. But it is still a huge industry. Around Naples, in the north of Naples, there are rose fields stretching for miles, producing all the roses that are used in the Roman Empire's perfume industry. Partly roses so popular because roses are sacred to Venus. So along with the myrtle. So quite a lot of scents will have those in for their associations with Venus, and hence their associations with love, with sex, and possibly even for use in some sort of love magic, because we know that, you know, part of prayers to Venus could be part of the same thing. They could be very expensive or not very expensive at all. Again, depends what ingredients you choose to put in it. One popular and expensive one that would be, you know, showing your class by having some of it is called Megallion. And Megallion is it's a base of unripe olive oil, and then the scents in it are cassia and cinnamon, spicy scents, burnt resin and myrrh. And I've made up a kind of close-ish approximation of this, and the resin is sort of piney, and then with the cinnamon, to me it smells of Christmas, because that combination of the spice and the pine, it's a nice smell, but it's not a smell I would think to use as a perfume. And I think that's true of a lot of these. They do like their very sort of deep, heavy scents. They like their myrrh, their spikenard, their poplar, frankincense, all of those deep note things. Another one is Mutopium, which is bitter almond oil with Omphacyon oil. Omphacyon, again, is Queen Omphale from the Hercules story previously. Cardamom, rush, flag, honey, wine, balsam, terebinth resins, a lot of resins going on in all of this. And these are not just for women, this is important. Perfume bottles are found in substantial numbers on military sites, suggesting that, you know, you can call it an aftershave if you like, but they're still wearing this stuff for the scent. And the scents that they're choosing to wear are not those that we would think of as being masculine necessarily. They are wearing, well, for instance, Sassinium is a popular Roman balm for men, and seems to be made of bennut oil, myrrh, saffron, lilies, cinnamon, roses. And we would not, I think of that as a masculine smell at all. Another thing that men used a lot is something called Croconum, which is largely bennut oil plus saffron. And it seems that they were using that, it would have a nice saffron-y smell. And it seems to be something they would put in their hair, and it would, you know, gel your hair back, be a little bit of oil in the hair, style your hair a little bit. But because of the saffron in there, apparently every time you leant back against a wall and walked away, you'd leave this sort of orange stain behind you. So you'd have to be careful where your head went. Usually they're in these little test tube vials called unguentariums. Unguentaria, obviously. Could be a solid, a liquid, or an ointment. Occasionally you get these beautiful little blown glass bird-shaped containers where you have to break the beak off, and then it's a single-use object. And it just stays there in this little glass little glass bird until it's time to use it, which I think is quite beautiful. So yes, you're going to want to smell of something possibly we would think of as a bit bizarre, and you'd want to keep topping it up quite regularly as well. You also, of course, got to look to your hair. And quite a lot of people seem to have dyed their hair, certainly in fashionable circles, whether just because it was fashionable or whether it's to cover greys. Blonde hair seems to be fashionable quite a lot of the time, and then red hair and very dark hair go in and out of fashion. As far as we can tell, it's not something that gets talked about that much. There are various ways to get these things. So if you want to get your blonder hair, saffron is going to lighten it a little bit. And they had also sort of worked out a kind of soap that was a mild bleach. If you made a soap with goat fat and beechwood ash, those should be the normal recipes to get a soap. But if you get the balance of them wrong, get them too alkali, you actually end up with a quite harsh bleach, which isn't going to do your hair any good, but more on that in a moment. The ways that you could get black hair, there's a black dye that you can get from a plant in the cabbage family or from the date family. Or again, we go back to Pliny for our ridiculous results because he's good at that. Pliny says the best way to get a black hair dye is to get some leeches and rot them in red wine for 40 days. You'll be unsurprised to know this is not a recipe that I have tried. He notes that other people use a slightly different recipe, which involves taking a pint of leeches, give or take, and twice that much vinegar in a lead pot for 40 days. So vinegar, red wine, lead pot, not. And then you have to apply it in the sunshine and this is apparently going to make your hair go black. So Sornatius comments on this recipe, and he thinks it is so strong that yes, it definitely will turn your hair black, but unless you keep olive oil in your mouth while you are using it, it'll turn your teeth black too. Imagine a hair dye so strong that the act of putting it on your hair will turn your teeth black. I mean, if they could turn black through sheer horror of what's happening to them, maybe. You could also do your hair somewhat red, and again, that goes in and out of fashion. You could use madder, or you can use henna. Henna obviously is still used for dyeing hair red. It works just as well as it ever did. We even know that blue and purple tints were occasionally used, that you could basically have a blue rinse. The Romans had time to try out most things. Again, some people disapprove of this sort of changing of your hair colour. Propertius, in his Elegies, says, even in the underworld, many ills befall the girl who foolishly changed her hair, lying. Again, it's this worry that you're going to deceive someone into thinking you're something you're not. Perhaps deceive them into thinking you're younger than you really are. If you dye away the grey in your hair, then you're lying, and that is going to get you in hell. And of course you can overdo all these things, particularly you can overdo the lightness, the bleaching effect. But there is a solution, don't you worry, if you've accidentally over-bleached your hair and it's all lost its condition. As one of Ovid's characters says to his own wife, "I've told you to stop using that rinse, and now you've no hair left to tint. But thanks to our German triumph, you're quite safe. One of the women prisoners can send you hers. Lose all your own hair? No problem. Get a slave's hair, turn it into a wig, you're sorted." In fact, quite a few of the hairstyles of the time were so elaborate that even if you did have all your own hair, hair pieces and wigs to kind of build it up would be part of the style anyway, possibly even adding things like pads of sheepskin in order to get the necessary height. They got most of their hair, if they wanted this blonde, they would get it from their slaves in Germany. If they wanted to get more dark hair, they would trade with it. And they had trade routes going all the way through sort of Persia and through as far as India. And we know that they did get black hair from India. And I find that fascinating because even now there is a big trade to the West of hair from Indian ladies because it tends to grow very long and very thick. And that trade has been going on, and probably an exploitative trade has been going on for at least 2,000 years. It's amazing. If you don't fancy that, of course, yes, you can make one out of sheep's wool, or actually one's found recently at Vindlander on Hadrian's Wall, which is a wig made out of moss. It's made of the stems of the hair moss plant, all sort of plaited together, and obviously it's called hair moss for a reason. It looks a bit like hair, so you can make yourself a complete wig out of it, apparently. So yes, look that up at Vindlander. It's very interesting. And again, you get some derision, and some of it comes from Martial in his epigrams, of course. He says, "You used purchased hair and teeth, and you're not ashamed to. How will you manage without your eye, Lelia? You can't buy eyes." He's very snarky, that one. Ovid mentions somebody who accidentally comes to, hears a guest at the door and gets ready hastily, because obviously Ovid wants you to look perfect before you answer the door, and does it so hastily that her wig is on back to front. Occupational hazards of being a perpetual wig wearer. There is some evidence of nails being done. Not a lot. It's one of these difficult ones. We know the Egyptians did it, so there's no reason to think that some of that didn't rub off on some sections and some parts of Roman society, but it's hard to know how far it went. And obviously we're not talking nail varnish at this point in our sense. It is more like a dye that goes through and sort of a stain on your nail. You can do it with henna. That's what the Egyptians tended to use. And again, I've had that on my nails. And you have to sort of get the paste. You can buy it in modern Arabic shops, and you sit for an hour like this, no, several hours like this, and it soaks in, and it comes out this beautiful sort of terracotta brick colour, which is rather nice. And it stays there for weeks because it's a stain. Unfortunately, after about 3 weeks, it's still there, but it suddenly just looks like you've got the worst case of smoker's nails ever. because it gradually sort of fades to this dark yellow colour that's really not very nice. I had to wear actual nail varnish for a while to disguise it. The other thing you could use is something called lac, which was a bright red colour that is a good dye that comes from a crushed Indian beetle. We can't be sure that's what they were doing with it, but it's reasonable to think that somebody would have tried it at some point. Finally, a lot of these things do seem to apply more to women, so it is worth saying, you know, how much, if any, of this is for men. And all the signs seem to suggest that it's not that dissimilar from now, in a sense, that makeup and perfume were sometimes worn by men, but if they were worn, then it would raise eyebrows. There are other times where men could get away with a little bit of sort of grooming products, but again, if they used a lot of grooming products, it would probably raise questions about them, and it would particularly suggest either that they were effeminate or homosexual, or that they were unsuited for a position of power. And the context in which it comes up generally are people commenting on one or another of those things and using it as a signifier. So, for instance, Emperor Otho wore a wig and used bread-based face packs, and that's something that's commenting on, you know, is he really a decent emperor if he wears a bread face pack? Vespasian was a very kind of military, yeah, he wouldn't be having any business with effeminacy, very sort of man's man. And when a young man smelling of perfume came to Vespasian to thank him for having been given a military commission, Vespasian took one look at him and one sniff of him, cancelled his appointment and said sternly, "I wish you'd smelled of garlic." Anything but perfume, basically. If he comes smelling of perfume, then he's clearly not the man for the job in Vespasian's eyes. Ovid advises men who are wooing women, "Don't delight in curling your hair with tongs. Male beauty is the better for neglect. Theseus carried off Ariadne without a single pin in his hair. Neatness pleases, and a body tanned from exercise, a well-fitting and spotless toga. Let an expert hand trim your head and your beard, and no long nails and no hairs, please, sprouting from your nostrils. But leave the rest for impudent women to do, or soever's the sort of man who needs a man." And I think that kind of sums up the attitude of the time in terms of what would be suitable and for whom. But the rest is left for us mere impudent women to do, and as you can see, there is quite a lot that we can do, and it all stays on really quite nicely. Again, wouldn't recommend necessarily using many of the original ingredients, but if you're desperate for some eyeliner at some point, a bit of soot and a bit of olive oil does the trick just fine and saves you an awful lot of money down the counter in the supermarket. So there you go. You get money-saving tips here as well. On that note, I shall leave you. I have no idea what I'm going to do next week. We'll find out when we get there. Take care all, and dress up as if you're going to a toga party.